Christmas Eve was meant for warmth, but I ended the night bleeding on my son's cold hardwood floor. I looked up at the boy I had raised for over 30 years and realized he was gone. In his place stood a stranger who watched his wife assault me. As I wiped the blood from my eyes, I understood that true revenge is not loud. Sometimes it is as quiet and cold as the winter snow falling outside. My name is Margaret Holloway. I have lived in the quiet town of Coldridge, Pennsylvania, for most of my 58 years. The winter here does not forgive, and this December was proving to be one of the harshest on record. I stood by my living room window, watching the snow bury the walkway. It was the 23rd of December. Inside, my house was silent. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears when you have lived alone for too long. I spent 30 years as an accountant for the North River Community Trust. I spent my days ensuring that columns balanced and that every penny was accounted for. I liked the certainty of mathematics. There is no lying in a spreadsheet. My son, Daniel, used to be the bright spot in my grey world. He is 32 years old now. Since his father passed away when he was a boy, it had just been the two of us. We were close. But then he met Brooke. She is a tall woman with blonde hair that never moves and a smile that feels like a draft from an open window. She is always polite. She says please and thank you. And how are you? Margaret. But there is nothing behind it. It is a performance. Since they married 3 years ago, Daniel has changed. He looks at her to see how he should react before he looks at me. Recently, the air between us had shifted. It was not just the usual distance of a child growing up and leaving the nest. It was something sharper. I live off my savings and the retirement fund I built slowly, dollar by dollar, over decades of skipped vacations and brown bag lunches. I am not wealthy, but I am secure. At least, I believed I was. My phone rang on the kitchen counter, cutting through the quiet. It was Daniel. Hello? Daniel? I said, trying to keep my voice light. Hey, Mum? He said. He sounded tired. I just wanted to check on the time for tomorrow. Brooke is, well, she's really anxious about the dinner. I will be there at 6 o'clock. Daniel? Just as we planned. Right. 6. Okay. Look. Mom, about the gifts. He trailed off. My stomach tightened. What about them, I asked. Nothing. Never mind. Just, please don't bring up the house repairs tomorrow. Okay. Brooke is, she's sensitive about money right now. I won't say a word. I promised. Though the warning stung. I hung up the phone and looked around my kitchen. It was clean. Orderly. But I felt a tremor in my hands that had nothing to do with the cold. I had that feeling again. The same feeling I used to get at work when a ledger did not quite balance, even though the math looked right on the surface. It was a vibration in the air, a shadow in the corner of my eye. My mother's intuition was mixing with my professional paranoia. Something was wrong. I could not name it yet, but I could feel it approaching like the storm outside. It was a dark, heavy weight pressing against my chest. I walked to my desk where I kept my financial files. I had not looked at them in a few weeks because Brooke had offered to help me set up the paperless billing system. She said it would be easier for me. She said I should not worry about the clutter of mail. I reached for the drawer handle, my hand hovering there for a moment. I did not know it then, but the peace I had built was already gone. I sat at my kitchen table with my iPad propped up against the fruit bowl. The morning light was grey and weak, filtering through the lace curtains I had sewn myself 10 years ago. I tapped the banking application icon with a finger that felt stiff from the cold. Brooke had insisted I install this application 3 months ago. She said it was for my convenience, so I would not have to drive to the branch in the snow. I remembered her long, manicured fingers tapping the screen, setting up the password, her voice smooth like warm honey. It is so much safer this way. Margaret, she had said, you do not want your paper statements getting stolen from the mailbox. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I scrolled down the list of transactions for December. My eyes, trained by decades of spotting discrepancies in non-profit ledgers, caught a snag. It was a withdrawal for $60 from an ATM at a gas station on the edge of town. I frowned. I had not bought gas on Tuesday. I had not left the house on Tuesday. I felt a cold flush of panic rise in my throat. My first thought was not of theft, but of my own mind. I put a hand to my forehead. Was I forgetting things? Was this how it started? The slow erosion of memory that took my sister 2 years ago, I tried to retrace my steps. Maybe I had gone out. Maybe I bought milk. But $60 for milk seemed impossible. I kept scrolling. The panic turned into a dull, rhythmic thud in my chest. There were more. $40 at a coffee shop I never visited. $120 at an electronics store. $200 withdrawn in cash at midnight on a Friday. I reached for my physical notebook. I always kept a manual log. I compared my handwritten notes with the digital screen. My handwriting was shaky, but the math was solid. The discrepancy was not in my head. It was in the account. I clicked on the details of the ATM withdrawal. The transaction was linked to the secondary debit card. My breath hitched. I had given that card to Daniel 2 years ago, strictly for emergencies. It was for when he picked up my prescriptions, or if I ended up in the hospital. We had an agreement. I picked up the phone. I needed to hear his voice. I needed him to tell me he lost the card, or that there was a mistake. Hi. Mom? Daniel answered on the second ring. The background noise was loud, music and chatter. Daniel? Are you busy? I asked. Kind of. We are at the mall. Brooke is looking for... Well, she is looking for something specific for the table setting. What's up? I was looking at my bank statement. Daniel? There are some charges on the emergency card. There was a pause on the other end. It lasted too long. Oh. Which ones? His voice sounded tight. Cash withdrawals and some shopping charges. It adds up to nearly $600 this month. Mum? You probably just forgot you asked me to pick things up, he said, his tone shifting from nervous to dismissive. You know how you get lately. You asked me to get that heater. Remember? The heater was $80. Daniel. And I wrote you a check for it separately. Look, I can't talk about this right now. He snapped. Brooke is calling me. You are confused. We will sort it out later. I have to go. The line went dead. I lowered the phone slowly. He did not deny it. He did not sound surprised. He sounded like a man who was tired of covering his tracks. I looked back at the screen. You are confused, he had said. That was Brooke's word. She often told me I was confused when I questioned her about dinner plans or appointment times. The confusion in my mind cleared, leaving behind a landscape that was stark and terrifying. They were not just spending my money. They were counting on my silence. They were banking on the fact that I was an old woman who would doubt her own sanity before she doubted her only son. I stood up and walked to the printer in the study. My legs felt heavy, but my mind was sharp. The accountant in me took over. I needed proof. I printed the statements for the last 6 months. I highlighted every unauthorized transaction in yellow. I took photos of the documents with my phone and uploaded them to a cloud storage account I had created years ago for work, one Brooke did not know about. I watched the printer spit out page after page. The sound was rhythmic, like a heartbeat. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and stinging. It was not fear anymore. It was the crushing weight of betrayal. The money did not matter as much as the lie. Daniel was stealing from me. And worse, he was making me believe I was losing my mind to cover it up. I gathered the papers into a neat stack. I would not call him back. I would not scream. I would let them think I was the confused, frail old woman they wanted me to be. I would wait for Christmas Eve. If they wanted my money, they would have to look me in the eye and explain why. I placed the folder in my bottom drawer and locked it. The investigation had begun. I sat in my armchair with the folder of bank statements resting heavily on my lap. The house was quiet, but my mind was loud with the echoes of the past. I looked at the framed photograph on the mantel, the one taken the day Daniel graduated from college. I was wearing a blue dress that I had bought at a discount store so I could afford the hotel room for the weekend. In the photo, Daniel's arm was draped around my shoulder, his smile wide and unburdened. He looked at the camera, but I was looking at him. I had always been looking at him. When my husband Robert died of a heart attack, Daniel was only 8 years old. I did not have time to grieve. I had a mortgage to pay and a boy to raise. I remembered the nights I sat at the kitchen table, eyes burning from exhaustion, doing freelance tax returns for neighbors after finishing my shift at the North River Community Trust. I traded my sleep for his tuition. I traded my social life for his braces. I did it willingly. That is what a mother does. She carves pieces out of herself to build a foundation for her child to stand on. I remembered the day Daniel asked me to help him buy his house. He and Brooke had just gotten engaged. They wanted a beautiful colonial on the edge of town, but Daniel's credit score was not strong enough. "Mum, we just need a co-signer," he had said, his eyes pleading. "It is just a formality. I promise you we'll never have to worry about a payment." I signed the papers. I put my financial security on the line because I wanted him to have the home I struggled to keep for us. Then Brooke took over. At first, I thought she was a blessing. She was organized and efficient. She reminded me of myself at that age, sharp and ambitious. But slowly, her helpfulness turned into a fence she built around my son. She started answering his phone. She started managing his schedule. And then, she turned her attention to me. I closed my eyes and replayed the conversation from last Thanksgiving. We were in my kitchen, and I was looking for my checkbook. "Margaret." "Really?" Brooke had said, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in her hand. "Why are you still messing around with paper checks? It is so antiquated." "I like to keep track." "Brooke," I had replied. "You know," she had said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Statistics show that people over 55 are the primary targets for fraud. You should let Daniel and me simplify things for you. We can consolidate your accounts. It is for your own protection. We just want you to be safe." Simplify. That was the word she used. Now I understood that to her. Simplify meant strip. It meant removing my control so she could access what I had saved. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I looked at the clock. It was 3 in the afternoon. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. The conflict in my chest was physically painful. Part of me wanted to burn the papers in my lap. I wanted to pretend I never saw the withdrawals. I was terrified. I was not afraid of poverty. I was afraid of the silence. If I confronted them, I risked losing the only family I had left. I risked never holding a grandchild. I risked dying alone in this house with nothing but my pride. But then I looked at Robert's picture next to Daniel's. Robert was a man of absolute integrity. He would never have tolerated a thief, even if that thief was his own blood. And he certainly would not have tolerated his son becoming a coward who let his wife rob his mother. I touched the cold leather of the folder. I could not buy their love with my silence. If their presence in my life depended on my willingness to be a victim, then I had already lost them. I cannot let this go. I whispered to the empty room. I stood up. My knees popped, a reminder of my age. But my spine felt straighter than it had in months. I would go to their house for Christmas Eve dinner. I would sit at their table. I would eat their food. And then I would ask for the truth. Christmas was a time for family, and families were built on trust. If the trust was gone, we needed to know what remained in the ruins. I placed the folder into my large handbag and zipped it shut. The zipper made a sound like a closing door. I was ready. I pulled my sedan into the driveway of the house I had helped pay for. The windows glowed with golden light, and a large wreath with a red velvet bow hung on the front door. It looked like a postcard of the American dream. Inside my purse, the manila folder felt heavy, like a stone I was carrying to a drowning. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My lipstick was red, my hair was pinned back, and my eyes were dry. I took a deep breath of the freezing air and stepped out. Brooke opened the door before I could knock. She was wearing a silk dress that looked expensive. "Margaret, Merry Christmas," she exclaimed, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her perfume was overpowering, a floral scent that masked the smell of the roast beef cooking in the kitchen. "Come in. Come in. It is freezing out there." Daniel was standing by the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He looked pale. He did not meet my eyes immediately. "Hey, Mom," he said, taking a long sip of his drink. "Let me take your coat." "Thank you." "Daniel," I said. We moved into the living room. The tree was magnificent, piled high with gifts wrapped in silver and blue paper. I accepted a glass of water, refusing the wine Brooke offered. I needed a clear head. For 20 minutes, we played the game. We talked about the weather. We talked about the neighbors. Brooke talked about her Pilates class. The tension was a low hum in the room, like a refrigerator about to break down. When there was a lull in the conversation, I set my glass down on a coaster. "Daniel," I said, keeping my voice low and even, "I want to talk about the bank account before we eat." The air in the room instantly vanished. Daniel froze, his hand halfway to his mouth. Brooke's smile stayed fixed, but her eyes went hard. "Margaret, seriously?" Brooke laughed, a brittle sound. "It is Christmas Eve. Can we not talk about finances for one night? It is so depressed. I found withdrawals." "Daniel?" I continued, ignoring her. $600 here, $200 there. It adds up to over $4,000 in the last 3 months. I want to know what happened." "Mum?" "Look, I can explain." Daniel stammered, his eyes darting to Brooke. "There is nothing to explain." Brooke cut in, her voice sharpening. "You are probably just forgetting things again. Margaret, remember the heater, you are getting confused. It happens." I reached into my bag. I did not say a word. I pulled out the folder and opened it. I took the stack of highlighted statements and laid them gently on the coffee table, right next to a crystal bowl of pine cones. The yellow highlighter marks screamed against the white paper. I am not confused. Brooke, I said. I matched the transaction times. I know you have the card. Daniel, I know the money went to a debit terminal at a luxury boutique in the city. I know it paid for a spa weekend. Daniel looked at the papers, his face crumbling. He sat down heavily on the sofa. He did not look at me. He looked at the floor. Daniel, I said, look at me. He doesn't have to look at you. Brooke snapped. She stood up, her polite mask shattering completely. You are being paranoid. You are obsessed with every single penny. Do you know how hard we are struggling? Do you even care I care that you are stealing from me? I said. We are not stealing. Brooke shouted. Her face was flushed now. We were borrowing it. We were going to put it back when Daniel's bonus came in. God, you make it sound like a crime. It is family money. It is my money, I said, my voice trembling slightly for the first time. And you did not ask. That makes it theft. I looked at my son. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to tell his wife that she was wrong. I waited for him to apologize. Mum? Daniel said, his voice weak and pathetic. We really needed the cash flow. Brooke has been under a lot of stress. We were going to tell you. He did not defend me. He justified her. The room felt suddenly small and suffocating. The twinkling lights on the tree looked garish. The warmth of the fire felt like a fever. I want the card back, I said, standing up. And I want a repayment plan signed tonight. You are unbelievable, Brooke hissed, stepping closer to me. You sit there on your pile of retirement money while your son drowns. You are a selfish old woman. Brooke, stop, Daniel mumbled, but he made no move to physically intervene. No, she needs to hear it. Brooke screamed. She comes into our house on Christmas Eve to humiliate us over a few $1,000s. It ends now, I said, staring at Daniel. Give me the card. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a violence that had not yet been touched, but was waiting, right there in the room with us. You are doing this on purpose, Brooke shouted. Her face was twisted into something ugly and unfamiliar. You do not care about the money. You just want to control him. You have been trying to destroy this marriage since the day we met. I looked at her, stunned by the venom in her voice. I am trying to stop you from robbing me, Brooke. Robbing you? She laughed, a high, hysterical sound. We are your family. That money is going to be ours eventually anyway. You are just sitting on it out of spite. I turned to Daniel. He was pacing the room now, running his hands through his hair. He looked like a trapped animal. Daniel, tell her to stop, I said. Tell her that taking money without asking is a crime. Daniel stopped pacing. He spun around to face me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. Shut up, Mum. Just shut up. He screamed. The volume of his voice made me flinch. Why do you have to make everything so difficult? Why couldn't you just let it slide? We were going to pay it back. By stealing more? I asked, my voice steady despite the shaking in my legs. I am done listening to this. Since you refuse to return the card or sign a repayment agreement, I have no choice. Tomorrow morning, I am going to the bank to file a fraud report, and then I am calling my lawyer to rewrite my will. The room went completely silent. The crackling of the fire was the only sound. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Brooke looked at Daniel, and then she looked at me. Her expression shifted from anger to cold calculation. "You are not going to do that," Brooke said softly. "Watch me," I said. I reached for my purse on the table. Brooke moved before I could react. She lunged across the small space between us. Her hands slammed into my chest with shocking force. "No!" she shrieked. I stumbled back. My heel caught on the edge of the thick area rug. I flailed my arms, trying to find purchase, but there was nothing to grab. I fell backward. My shoulder hit the floor first, followed by the back of my head. The sound was a sickening thud against the hardwood. Pain exploded in my shoulder and radiated down my arm. For a moment, my vision blurred. I gasped for air. The wind knocked out of me. I lay there on the cold wood, staring up at the ceiling where the festive lights cast dancing shadows. "Oh my God," Brooke whispered. She stood over me, her chest heaving. She did not offer a hand. She did not ask if I was okay. She looked at Daniel. She tripped. I tried to sit up, but a sharp stab of agony in my hip made me cry out, "Daniel!" I wheezed, "Help me!" Daniel looked down at me. His face was pale, stripped of all color. He looked at his wife, then at his mother lying broken on the floor. He made a choice. He did not walk toward me. He walked to the front door. I watched in horror as he engaged the deadbolt. Then he slid the chain lock into place. Click. Slide. The sounds were loud in the quiet room. "Daniel," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing? We can't let her leave." "Brooke," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "If she leaves, if she goes to the police, I lose my license. We lose the house." "You are right," Brooke said. She took a step back from me, her eyes hard. "She is hysterical. She fell. We need to calm her down." I realized then that the danger was not over. It had just begun. My son was not locking the world out to protect me. He was locking me in to protect himself. The pain in my body was nothing compared to the ice that filled my veins. I was trapped in a house with two people who had just realized that my silence was worth more to them than my life. "I need a doctor," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "My hip. I think it is broken." "You are fine," Brooke snapped. "Stop being dramatic. You just need to listen to reason." I lay still, clutching my purse to my chest. I measured my breaths. 1, 2, 3. I had to stay awake. I had to stay alive. The Christmas tree twinkled in the corner, mocking me. This was not a family dinner anymore. It was a hostage situation. I did not save myself. Mrs. Higgins. The elderly woman who lived next door to Daniel had been walking her dog. She heard the screaming. She heard the thud. She called 911. I remember the flashing blue lights washing over the living room walls, turning the Christmas tree into a grotesque, pulsating monster. I remember the sound of the police pounding on the door. I remember Daniel standing there, pale and shaking, as he unlocked it. He did not look at me as the paramedics lifted me onto the stretcher. He did not hold my hand. I woke up in room 304 of the county hospital. My hip was fractured. I had a concussion. My arm was in a sling. The pain was a dull, constant roar, but the doctors gave me medication that made the edges of the world feel soft and distant. I lay there for 2 days. I watched the snow fall outside the hospital window. I watched the nurses come in to check my vitals. I watched the door. Every time it opened, my heart would jump, just a little, expecting to see him. I expected to see Daniel rushing in, tears in his eyes, begging for forgiveness. I expected him to tell me it was a mistake. I expected him to be the son I had raised. But the door only opened for doctors and nurses. My phone sat on the bedside table, black and silent. No calls. No messages. Not even a generic text to see if I was still alive. That silence was worse than the fracture in my hip. It was the sound of a cord being cut. For 32 years. I had been his mother. In 48 hours. I had become a liability, a problem to be managed, an enemy to be ignored. On the morning of the third day, a detective from the Coldridge Police Department came in. He was a young man with kind eyes and a notebook that looked too small for the horrors it contained. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "I need to ask you about the incident on Christmas Eve. Your son and his daughter-in-law claim you tripped over a rug while you were having a verbal argument. They say you were confused." I looked at the ceiling. I traced the pattern of the tiles with my eyes. I thought about the lock clicking shut. I thought about Brooke standing over me, waiting. I thought about the money they stole. I thought about the husband who was gone and the son who was lost. If I told the truth, I would destroy his life. I would send him to prison. I would brand him as a criminal. If I lied, I would be the confused old woman they wanted me to be. I would go back to my empty house. I would let them win. I looked at the detective. The tears I expected to feel did not come. Instead, I felt a coldness spreading through my chest. It was not the cold of fear. It was the cold of absolute clarity. I did not trip. I said, my voice was raspy, but it did not shake. "Can you tell me what happened?" the detective asked, his pen hovering over the paper. "My daughter-in-law, Brooke, pushed me," I said. "And my son? Daniel?" He locked the door. He locked the door so I could not leave. They were trying to stop me from reporting financial fraud. The detective stopped writing. He looked up at me. "Financial fraud and unlawful imprisonment?" "Yes," I said. "I have evidence. It is in my purse. Or it was. They might have taken it. We secured your personal effects." "Ma'am," he said. "We will check." "Write it all down," I said. "I want to press charges against both of them." As he wrote, I felt a strange sensation. The heavy burden of motherhood, the weight I had carried since Daniel was born, was lifting. I was no longer his protector. I was no longer his safety net. I was just Margaret. And Margaret had been wronged. I closed my eyes. The image of Daniel's face as he locked the door burned behind my eyelids. I would not forget it. I would not forgive it. I lay back against the pillows and listened to the scratch of the pen on paper. It was the sound of the first brick being laid in a wall that would separate us forever. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, I was not afraid. I was ready. I did not return to my empty house to mourn the family I had lost. Instead, I checked into a small, secure hotel on the north side of Coldridge and called Arthur Vance. Arthur was a forensic accountant and attorney who had a reputation for being as cold and unforgiving as the Pennsylvania winters. I had known him professionally during my years at the North River Community Trust, but I never thought I would need him to investigate my own blood. We met in the hotel lobby 2 days after I was discharged. I handed him the digital access codes I had changed immediately after the assault. I gave him the hard drive containing the backups of my emails. I gave him everything. Arthur worked fast. It took him less than 48 hours to find the ghost. "Margaret?" Arthur said, placing a single sheet of paper in front of me. "This is not just simple theft. This is structured embezzlement. Look at this." I looked at the document. It was a digital authorization form granting transfer rights to a third-party account. At the bottom was my signature. But it was not my signature. It was a pixelated copy of a signature I had used on a birthday card I gave Daniel 3 years ago. "I never signed this," I said, my voice flat. "I know." Arthur replied. "The metadata shows this file was created at 2 o'clock in the morning on a laptop registered to Brooke Holloway. The funds were not just being withdrawn for cash. They were being funneled into an LLC called BH Consulting. It is a shell company. Margaret. Brooke is the sole proprietor." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. And Daniel Arthur sighed. He tapped a line on the spreadsheet. Daniel received the fraud alerts on his email. The logs show he opened them, and then he deleted them. He did not just ignore it. He actively scrubbed the trail to keep you blind. That was the final nail. My son was not a helpless bystander. He was the gatekeeper. I took the file to the Coldridge Financial Crimes Unit the next morning. I did not cry. I did not hesitate. I sat in a grey room with Detective Miller and a financial crimes specialist and laid out the anatomy of their betrayal. I authorized them to pull every record, every text message, and every deleted email. "Mrs. Holloway," the specialist asked, "if we pursue this, your son will likely face conspiracy charges. Are you prepared for that?" "Do what you have to do," I said. For the next week, I became a ghost. I did not go home. I did not answer my landline. My cell phone showed 17 missed calls from Daniel. He left voicemails that I listened to, but did not return. "Mom, please pick up." His voice cracked in the first message. "We are worried about you. We just want to talk." "Mum, this is getting ridiculous," he said in the 5th message, sounding more angry than worried. "You can't just disappear." I sat in my hotel room, drinking tea, watching the snow fall. I was not disappearing. I was waiting. I knew the timeline of the bank's fraud protocol. I knew exactly when the hammer would drop. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I knew it happened because my phone lit up with a call from Brooke. I watched it ring. Then another call from Daniel. Then a text message from Brooke that popped up on my screen. "Margaret, my cards are not working. There must be a mistake. Call me back immediately." I smiled. It was a small, tight smile. They were standing at a checkout counter somewhere, or trying to pay a bill, and the machine had declined them. The assets were frozen. The investigation was active. The terrifying reality was setting in. They were not dealing with a confused mother anymore. They were dealing with an accountant who knew exactly where the numbers went. I picked up my phone, but not to call them. I called Arthur. They noticed. I said, "Good." Arthur said, "The police just obtained a warrant for their digital devices. They will be knocking on their door in about an hour. Thank you." "Arthur," I said. I hung up and looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant, hard blue. I imagined Daniel and Brooke in that house, the house I paid for, listening to the silence of their frozen bank accounts, waiting for a mercy that was not coming. I was not angry anymore. Anger is hot and messy. This was justice, and justice is very, very cold. I stood in the small, darkened observation room behind the one-way mirror. The air conditioner hummed with a low, mechanical drone that vibrated against my ribs. Detective Miller stood next to me, his arms crossed over his chest. On the other side of the glass, my son sat at a metal table. Daniel looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his face was the color of old ash. "We have Mrs. Holloway in the other interrogation room," Detective Miller said quietly. "She is talking. She is talking a lot." I watched as another detective entered the room with Daniel. He tossed a file onto the table. The sound made Daniel flinch. "Your wife is very helpful." "Daniel," the detective inside the room said. "She is telling us quite a story. She says this entire scheme was your idea." Daniel looked up, his eyes wide with confusion. "What? No, that is impossible. Brooke would never say that. She says you were desperate." The detective continued, leaning forward. "She claims you were embarrassed that you could not support her lifestyle on your salary. She says you told her to set up the shell company. She says she was just a dutiful wife, following her husband's instructions to manage family assets." "That is a lie," Daniel shouted, half standing before collapsing back into his chair. She told me it was temporary. She said we were just borrowing it. I never told her to steal. She has provided us with emails." "Daniel?" the detective said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Emails where you authorized access. Emails where you thanked her for handling the banking issues. She is painting you as the mastermind, and she is the victim of a controlling husband." I watched my son's face crumble. It was not just fear. It was the devastation of a man realizing that his entire life was a performance. The woman he had stolen for, the woman he had assaulted his own mother for, was now serving him up to the police to save her own skin. "She loves me," Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. We are a team. She called you a useful idiot in a text message to her sister 3 months ago," the detective said. "She said she was tired of waiting for your mother to die so she could get the real money." I flinched. The words hit the glass like stones. Beside me, Detective Miller shifted his weight. "I am sorry you had to hear that. Mrs. Holloway," he murmured. "Do not be," I said, my voice steady. I needed to hear it, and so did he. Inside the room, Daniel put his head in his hands and began to sob. It was an ugly, ragged sound. He was realizing that the foundation of his marriage was nothing but greed. He had traded his mother for a woman who saw him as nothing more than a paycheck and a scapegoat. Brooke Holloway is being charged with 4 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and assault causing bodily injury, Detective Miller told me. Because Daniel facilitated the access and covered it up, he is facing charges for conspiracy and aiding and abetting. His employer has already been notified of the investigation. He will likely lose his license. I looked at Daniel one last time. He looked like the boy who used to scrape his knees playing in the driveway, waiting for me to come pick him up and make it better. But I stayed on my side of the glass. The glass was thick, cold, and soundproof. It was the perfect metaphor for what stood between us now. "Do you want to go in?" Detective Miller asked. "Do you want to speak to him? Sometimes parents want to see if they can work out a plea deal. If you ask for leniency, the district attorney might listen." I tightened my grip on my cane. My hip throbbed, a permanent reminder of my daughter-in-law's shove and my son's locked door. "No," I said. "No," the detective asked, surprised. "He is 32 years old. Detective, I said. He made his choice when he turned the lock on that door. If I save him now, he will never learn. He needs to understand that actions have consequences. I turned away from the window. I did not look back at the sobbing man in the metal chair. I walked out of the observation room and into the bright, harsh lights of the hallway. My son was alone, and for the first time in 30 years, I allowed him to be. I stood on my front porch and looked at the wreath on the door. The pine needles had turned brown and brittle in the weeks I had been away. I unlocked the door and stepped into the hallway. The air inside was stale, holding the cold scent of a house that had been asleep while its owner was at war. I walked to the thermostat and turned the heat up. The furnace kicked on with a low rumble, a sound that used to make me feel lonely, but today sounded like a heartbeat returning to a chest. I placed my keys in the bowl by the door. It was over, mostly. Arthur Vance had called me that morning. We recovered the funds. Margaret, he had said. The bank reversed the unauthorized transfers once the police report was filed. $42,000 is back in your account. We are still chasing the last $3,000 that was spent on non-refundable travel, but the bulk of your life savings is safe. Thank you, Arthur. I had replied. It was never really about the money. I know, he said softly, but at least you can pay your heating bill. I walked into the kitchen. A pile of mail sat on the counter where the neighbor had stacked it for me. I sifted through the bills and flyers until I saw it. A white envelope with no stamp. Hand delivered. The handwriting was familiar. It was shaky and rushed, but I recognized the loop of the capital M. It was the handwriting I had taught him when he was 5 years old. Sitting at this very table, I sat down and opened the letter. Mom. The letter began. I do not know what to say. I'm so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But please, you have to understand. I was drowning. Brooke. She made everything seem so urgent. I never wanted to hurt you. I am sitting in this apartment alone. Mom? I lost my job. Everyone is looking at me like I'm a criminal. I need you. Please. Just call me. I am still your son. I read the letter twice. Then I placed it on the table. In the past, my heart would have broken. I would have picked up the phone. I would have driven to him. I would have written a check to fix his mistakes because that is what mothers do. We absorb the pain, so our children do not have to feel it. But as I looked at the paper, I did not feel the urge to fix him. I felt a strange, quiet distance. I remembered the look in his eyes when he locked the door. That was not a boy drowning. That was a man deciding that his mother's safety was less important than his wife's greed. I picked up the letter and walked to the trash can. I did not tear it up. I did not burn it. I simply dropped it in, right on top of a flyer for a grocery store sale. I was done being the victim. I was done being the sacrifice. For 30 years, every decision I made was filtered through the lens of what was best for Daniel. I worked 2 jobs for Daniel. I stayed in this town for Daniel. I saved every penny for Daniel. No more. I said to the empty room. I looked around the kitchen. It needed painting. I had always wanted to paint it a soft yellow, but Daniel said it was too bright. I decided I would go to the hardware store tomorrow. I would buy the brightest yellow paint they had. I would book a trip to Italy, a place I had dreamed of since I was 20. I would spend my money on wine and art and heating bills. The silence in the house was no longer heavy. It felt spacious. It felt like room to breathe. Christmas Eve had broken something fundamental between us, but it had also fixed something inside me. The umbilical cord was finally cut. The wound was cauterized. I was not just a mother anymore. I was Margaret. And for the first time in a very long time, I liked her. I made myself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the snow fall. The trial was set for next week. I knew it would be brutal. I knew Daniel's lawyer would try to paint me as senile or vindictive. I knew Brooke would lie. But it did not matter. I had the truth, and I had my dignity. I took a sip of the hot tea and felt the warmth spread through my chest. I was ready to face them. I was ready to close the book. The trial concluded on the 15th of January, just as the last of the dirty snow was melting from the sidewalks of Coldridge. The courtroom was a box of polished wood and fluorescent light, stripped of all the warmth and sentimentality of the holiday season that had started this nightmare. I sat in the front row, wearing my best navy blue suit and the pearl earrings Robert had given me for our 25th anniversary. I was the final witness called by the state. When the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Sterling, called my name, I walked to the stand without a limp. My hip had healed, though it ached when the weather turned, a permanent reminder of the night my family died. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. It was the easiest promise I had ever made. Mrs. Holloway. Ms. Sterling asked, standing casually by the jury box. Did you, at any point, authorize Brooke Holloway or Daniel Holloway to transfer funds from your retirement accounts into the entity known as B.Ch. Consulting? No, I said. My voice was clear. It did not tremble. And on the night of December 24th, did you trip and fall as the defense claims I looked at Brooke? She was sitting at the defense table, wearing a grey cardigan, trying to look demure. Her hands were clenched so tightly that her knuckles were white. No, I said, keeping my eyes on her. I was pushed. That was it. There were no theatrics. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply stated the facts of what had been done to me. When I stepped down, I walked past the defense table. Daniel looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, hollowed out by sleepless nights and the terrifying reality of consequences. He opened his mouth as if to speak. "Mom," he whispered, the word hanging in the air like a ghost. I did not stop. I did not look away, but I did not acknowledge the name. The woman who answered to Mom had been left on the floor of his living room on Christmas Eve. The woman walking past him was a witness for the prosecution. The verdict came down 3 hours later. The jury did not need long. The paper trail Arthur Vance had uncovered was irrefutable. Brooke was found guilty of 4 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of assault. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison and ordered to pay full restitution. When the gavel came down, the mask finally slipped. She did not cry. She snarled, turning to blame her lawyer, her voice rising in a sharp, ugly crescendo before the bailiff silenced her. Daniel avoided prison time by taking a plea deal for a lesser charge of conspiracy, but the cost was his life as he knew it. He received 5 years of felony probation. He lost his C.P.A. license permanently. The house, the beautiful colonial I had helped him buy, would be sold to pay the legal fees and the restitution he owed me. He sat there, slumped in his chair. A man who had traded his integrity for a woman who was now being led away in handcuffs. I watched it all with a terrifying calmness. I expected to feel vindicated, or perhaps heartbroken. But I felt neither. I felt lightweight. The heavy burden of worrying about Daniel's future, of trying to shield him from the world, was gone. He was facing the world now, naked and alone, and that was the only way he would ever learn to stand. I stood up as the courtroom cleared. I buttoned my coat. I did not go to Daniel. I did not offer him money or a place to stay. I did not offer forgiveness. Forgiveness is something that must be earned, and he had not yet begun the work. I walked down the center aisle, the heels of my boots clicking rhythmically on the floor. I pushed open the heavy double doors of the courthouse and stepped out into the winter afternoon. The air was crisp and clean. The sun was shining. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold oxygen. I was 58 years old. I was alone, and for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. I walked toward my car, not looking back at the building that held the ruins of my past. The engine started with a reliable hum. I put the car in gear and drove away, leaving the rearview mirror empty. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I believe the truth has a power all its own. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please drop a comment down below and let's get a conversation going. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Stay safe out there.